Hi, everybody. I am Jon Taylor. I'm a clinical social worker, and my practice is located just outside of Salt Lake City, Utah. Um, the Rock and Relationships weekly webinar is focused on um, relationship aspects that need attention early on in recovery, and that you can definitely pay attention to early in recovery. The old way of thinking is that we've got to have two sober, grounded people to have a great relationship, and that's just not true. And so I look at aspects of relationships that make a big difference when we can make changes there, when we understand what's going on there, and usually have some ideas for how you can start to make these kind of specific changes in your relationship. So um, today we're going to talk about negative sentiment override. Um, and it's a big mouthful of a lot of clinical words. What it basically means is hypervigilance for criticism in a relationship. So I'm so worried that what I'm going to get from you or what I'm going to get from my relationship is criticism. I'm always guarded with that. When we have negative sentiment override going on, this is a sign that this relationship has not worked well or worked safely for a long time. Most of us, we can place when our partner or our boss or a coworker is off for a week, when they're cranky for a month. But when that is the core when that's the core experience of that person in our relationship with them, it starts to set this template that says, I need to be guarded with you. So when it comes to this hypervigilance to your partner's negativity, I think it's really important to ask, why am I so on the lookout for negativity from this person? And there can be a few reasons. The first and most obvious one is negativity can hurt, especially if it's in the form of criticism, or blame or abuse. So maybe I'm on the lookout for that because when my partner does this, it really, really hurts me, and I don't want to be hurt in that way. Another reason why we might be on the lookout is there's been a good number of people that I worked with who came up with the idea that any kind of conflict or any kind of negativity was bad or destructive to a relationship. And so they were hyper vigilant for negativity because it was kind of like the dog poop in the brownie. No amount of it is acceptable. The truth may be that there is some negativity that's going to come along with living right next to somebody, living in close relationship to somebody. And if your reason for being hypervigilant for the negativity is that you don't believe you can stand the negativity, or that we should only be positive, that's something that you want to look at within yourself and you want to work on within yourself, because negativity is part of the human experience. When it crosses the threshold into abusiveness or it's unchecked, that's where we have a relationship issue. So starting with that, why am I on the lookout for so much negativity, is a really helpful place to start with this. What happens in negative sentiment override is those negative sentiments, that defensiveness, replaces any positive feelings or positive narratives we used to have about the relationship. I think very few of us start out a long-term relationship with that feeling of, I really don't like this person and they make me feel completely unsafe. Usually there's I really admire this about this person, or when it comes to work, I love this aspect of the job. But over time, when enough injury happens, that really replaces the narrative. So whatever was positive, we don't see it anymore. Maybe it's not there anymore. And we're really into that attack defense thing. So we see the most negative connotation in anything that might otherwise be neutral or even positive, because we're bracing for it. We never feel like our partner is our ally when we're in negative sentiment override. So again, instead of experiencing, our partner reaching out to help or saying, can I help you with that, we would experience that as criticism versus they really want to help me, or they're noticing that I'm struggling. We might come back with, what, you don't think I can handle this? That would be an example of negative sentiment override. Like I had mentioned, this indicates that the relationship has not worked well for a long time. So the repair on negative sentiment override, it's a big job. And I would say it's something that both parties in the relationship have to be bought into. This isn't one of those things that we can just alter our outlook and it will change things there. We really need the help of our partner. So in order to work on negative sentiment override, we have to get specific about what's broken in the interaction, and we have to have a plan to change it together. So I've used this example before, that one of my long-standing vulnerabilities that rears its head often in my marriage is when my spouse will ask me any question that begins with why. That's already triggering for me, especially when it's why are you or why did you. That's already triggering for me. But something I noticed early on is when she tended to ask that question, there was an extra sharpness to that tone, and it made me feel really, really small. And so, of course, we had to go on for years in that dynamic without me saying anything about it, until one day I said, um, I don't know where this came from, but I said, I don't think you're meaning it this way, but I don't know if you realize when you ask me why, it sounds really accusatory, and it sounds parental, and that's really hard for me. And so we had a conversation about it, and the conclusion we came to is we were going to work on two ends of this. She was going to really work on a different way of bringing that up, a soft startup, which we've talked about. And I was going to work on taking her asking questions without defense, that I was actually going to engage in a conversation. And so we worked on that on both ends, and it really changed that dynamic. And it meant a lot to me because I could tell when we were working on it. I could tell that it wasn't something that bothered her, because she didn't say anything about it and she was unaware of it, but it really meant something to me. And when that started to change, it changed that narrative in my head even more effectively than me working on it on my own. So in a lot of relationships, some very common broken interactions in the relationship, it may be that our friendship has just fallen into disrepair. I look at people that I currently work close with, and people that I've worked close with in the past. One of the things that makes that relationship work is there's some element of friendship there. There's some element of ease. We can talk about interests, or we can have some downtime together, or things like that. And when we get so focused on the work at hand, accomplishing the task, and that friendship goes into disrepair, there's something lost in the relationship. And it's a lot harder to feel like that's a consistent ally. So sometimes going back and just working on, are we spending time together? Can we have fun together? Can we be at ease? Can we laugh with each other? Another common interaction can get broken is the harsh startup. And we did a webinar on this just a few weeks back. So starting up softly. I think, again, when we get into the task at hand in our relationship, whether that's a work relationship and we've got to get this product made or this thing done and delivered to clients, or when it's like in a romantic relationship. And for a lot of people in these rooms, the task of the relationship is just to stay together after there's been so much betrayal and so much hurt. And sometimes the sole focus on that, we get so down to brass tacks and so down to business that we forget that there's a vulnerable human being on the other end of the interaction there. So leading with some softness or leading with some kindness can go a long way to keep that positive perspective alive in the relationship. Another place where I commonly see broken interaction is in bids for connection or reaches. So this happens in any kind of relationship where we do that thing that indicates I'm thinking about you, or I want this to be easier for you. I want you to know that you have a place in my heart or in my mind. When those reaches happen and they're not recognized, that can be incredibly damaging to the person who does the reach. It can also, without stopping and recognizing the reach, the person who's being reached to can get the idea that their partner doesn't care about them. So a lot of times I'll see in couples or I'll see in relationships, we have to go back and we have to redefine how it is that I reach for you. And sometimes I reach for you in a way that it intuitively feels good to you. It intuitively feels like a reach. And other times it's, unless you know how I'm reaching, you'll miss it. And so going back and working on, this is how I bid for connection with you. I ask you to schedule time so we can spend time together. Or I may, a really simple way is when you speak to me, I give you some kind of response. That's a bid for connection back and forth. So when we want to fix negative sentiment override, in summary, long term, it's a two-person job. We have to be able to talk about what's not working in our relationship. We have to be able to talk about the negative state that our relationship is in. And we have to make some constructive plans to change very specific interactions. I need you to start up softer with me. I need it to feel like we have more of a friendship. I need it to feel like my bids for connection don't fall short, or I need to feel like you're bidding for connection with me. So we get to those really specific things. And over time, what that starts to change is the overall narrative of the relationship. Instead of I'm expecting all of my hurt to come from you, we might experience while hurt does come from you, I also know I have a good ally here. I have a good companion. And then we can really get back to the work of the relationship. And we're working on a different level. It's not just about surviving. It's actually about enriching one another's lives. So that is negative sentiment override.
As always, a lot of good information. I was thinking about, particularly with the example with your wife and like how long it went on, and that you finally said, hey, this is a problem. But I thought, I wonder how many times it is that we're not even really aware of So how often do you have it with couples that they struggle to define what it is that would be viewed as this? I mean, I would think often.
Yeah, I saw one of these this morning, this couple that I'm working with. This is post-disclosure for them. And she's been able to give her impact statement. And one of the things that naturally opens up for couples is the offending party or the betraying party really has to start looking at how have I created safety for this person and how I've affected this person. So to this husband in this couple, to his credit, he's really taking that seriously, and he's asking a lot of really good questions around it. So they were having a very difficult conversation this morning about some recent hurt. And as she was starting to talk about her hurt, he said, I just want to remind you, I probably won't be looking at you as you talk because you've expressed to me before that looks threatening. And I don't want you to feel threatened because I want to hear you. And she said, in this setting with Jon here, I don't feel threatened. That feels safer to me. And she said, thank you for checking that out. And I said to him, maybe this would be an opportunity for you to practice some of that empathetic gaze and, really look at her when she's talking. And it was some of the best nonverbal emotional co-regulation that I've ever seen. So he looked at her while she talked. She looked at him while she talked. She expressed anger. She showed it on her face. And he sat there and he took it in. And by the end of it, she was a lot calmer. There had actually been some processing there. And they had remarked afterward that neither of them had realized how intense his eye contact felt to her, how threatening that felt to her. They've been married 20 years, but this was like from day one, this was a thing in their marriage, and neither of them had realized the role that it was playing. And I think this happens all the time in couples. We want so desperately for our relationship to work out and for it to be good that we tend to, and until we can't ignore the weight anymore, we tend to overlook the things that aren't working or the things that don't feel good. And we try to just emphasize the positive instead of recognizing there's a balance. And part of what makes the positive so positive is we have these other parts that are more difficult or harder for us. And when we intentionally shift to the positive, we move into a position of strength. So I think all the time there's these unspoken things between couples that really significantly get in the way, but we may not know until we have to know.
I think that's really true. I think it's with friendships or, any relationship too. I was thinking, relationships fall in disrepair. And I was thinking, like sometimes I had the opportunity, a college roommate, came and, spent a few days with me, and it was great. And I thought, like the relationship wasn't in disrepair, but it was dusty because, we just hadn't been in proximity and all of that. But we attend to the relationship on, we stay in kind of communication. But this was awesome to be able to, to really, be there for each other and support each other and just, have that quality time. So I even thought of that. It's like, well, sometimes they're not like, the fixer up her house where it's been trashed, but it's like they just need a little, they need a little attention, and to intervene on it, even in that moment. I thought it was really significant too, that and I know I started thinking of like people I know that think if there's any bad, then it's bad for the relationship. And I also thought about how people only post all these glorious things on Facebook to make it look like everything is
Right.
fantastic. Which always makes me a little suspect anyway. But like even if I'm just having a bad day, that can put some negativity into a relationship. And so, if my partner isn't able to step into that, if he's having a bad day at the same time, it's a little more challenging, to be honest, to be able to be honest about where I am, where we are. I think but if you were raised with, that whole thing of like everything's got to look good, it's
Mhm.
appearances and everything's got to always look good, that's got to be a challenge just to come,
Mhm.
overcome, and be willing to step into honesty as well.
Yeah. Yeah, there's it's not my belief that conflict has to be the center of a relationship in order for us to be honest or for it to be good, but it certainly can't be pushed to the fringes or a once in a while thing. It's a, it's like the exhale to the inhale. It's got to be part of it if the system is going to work.
Yeah, and well, I don't think it has to be a knockdown drag out. I mean,
Nope.
I think even like if you're attending to things, then
Hmm.
I was thinking with the situation with your wife. I thought I bet she's getting much more information from you if she's asking it in a different way. Like if she really needs to understand why, then but she's asking it in a softer way so that you feel like it's not an attack. She's going to get the information she needs, and
Hmm.
you're even going to probably have a better feeling for why she's asking, like
Hmm.
what's behind all of this, so it just changes the whole game, on both levels.
And that curiosity and that learning only opens up when we have a different storyline in our head. Like, for me, for the longest time, it was she thinks I'm incompetent and that's why she's asking and that's why she's approaching this way. Really, what I learned as we talked about it is this was a bid for connection. I was off in my world involved in something. And really, what she wanted to ask was, hey, what are you doing?
Mm,
Tell me about it.
yeah.
And for whatever reason, the question she chose is, why are you doing that way? Or why are you using that tool? And I was thinking she was coming from this place of like, I know how to do it better. That totally wasn't on her radar at all.
Yeah.
It was a conversation starter. It was a reach. um, and so that's, I think, far more often than not, in a relationship where there's any kind of decent commitment, any kind of decent care for the other person, that's really what we want. Is I want to be a part of your world. And if this negative sentiment override thing is going on, there is a firm gate closed, to joining worlds, because we fundamentally do not see each other, or one party doesn't see the other person as safe. So again, that very first question is, why is it that I'm so on the lookout for negativity here? It's such an important one to answer, because that tells you a lot about, where the work needs to happen in order to change that.
So, so I'd like you to, what are some typical answers for why? Is it, I mean, like when there's betrayal, I get
Yeah,
that. Is it something that I brought into the relationship? Is it, I mean, so tell
you
me
know,
more.
I'll start with maybe the simplest explanation is, I'm on the lookout for negativity because when you're negative, I pay a price. It may be that you punish me with the silent treatment. It may be that when you're angry, it all gets channeled on me. You're really blaming when you're angry. You don't listen to reason. So it's that, like, I've actually sustained some hurt, and I would say like some abuse from you. And that's a good reason to be on the lookout for some anger. Some maybe not so clear explanations. Maybe some of that, like, I've never really had experience of anybody in a relationship who could raise hard issues with me and it not turn into criticism, or it not turn into whatever. So I'm not expecting anything positive to come from this. So, I'm looking not to say, I'm not looking at what do we do with this when it comes up. It's like, it can never come up because it's never useful. Um, so that might be one of the reasons why we're hyper vigilant. It could be a lack of skill. I work with a lot of couples, and I work with a lot of people in their professional lives. just on how to handle some kind of conflict or some kind of difference in need in a relationship in the workplace. And a lot of people, that's really foreign to them, to feel like we can have a difference in opinion or a difference in need, and we can still be connected and we can still be working together. Um, so I think those reasons of why we're hypervigilant, I think it's unique for everybody. But it often falls into, I'd say, two categories, either my experience with you or my experience back then. And it's really important to know the difference between those two.
Yeah, I could see that. And I do think, this is Rockin' Relationships. It's, across the board for relationships. But, I actually want people that have different opinions and come at things from a different lens than I do, because, those are my blind spots. If I am only focused here, this is the stuff I don't see. So I like it when somebody can point out, have you thought about this,
Yeah.
and so, but that's a soft approach of, have you thought about this, versus you should, because, that to me feels judgmental and like I failed, because or you should have done whatever, well,
Mm-hmm.
that wasn't in my lens, but thank you for pointing it out,
Yeah.
but it's helpful. And in work, relationships, hopefully a work environment is created so that you do have a voice and you can have these discussions and, come to a better conclusion,
Mm-hmm.
than you would, I think, that an individual, might, as well. So
Mm-hmm.
we have a question. It says, I don't feel from experience that I can have an open discussion about the continuous violations regarding our interactions. Is there a way to not have negative sentiment override? Right now, he is giving me the silent treatment, but because he won't tell me what is wrong, I just look at what what he's doing as typical reasons not to open up to him.
Yeah. So the question I hear in there is there a way to not have negative sentiment override? And I put it this way. So I've recently discovered powdered peanut butter. And I really like to have it on hand because I do a lot of hiking. I like to snack when I'm at work, and it's lightweight. It doesn't go bad. It's not messy. Well, it's not messy like regular peanut butter. But the thing that I discovered as I was eating, my favorite way to eat it in there, like get it all smothered in this peanut butter powder and eat it. And if I what I was discovering is that I was inhaling the peanut butter dust because I
Oh,
wasn't timing my breathing right. Like breathing has to happen, right? And so when I wasn't timing that right, I would take a mouthful and I would inhale it rather than eat it, and I'd get like peanut butter induced pneumonia, which um, was not fun. Um, so there's a reflex that has to happen there, and when I listen to that reflex, and this might sound really, but when I time the eating of my powdered peanut butter with my breath, I take a bite somewhere in the middle of an exhale. I have time for that peanut butter to coat in my mouth, and then I'm not going to inhale it, and it's just enjoyable. Um, if if I'm taking a bite at the wrong time, I'm going to have to inhale, and there's not a way around that. So if I'm getting too fast or too anxious, I'm going to inhale, and it's going to be hard. When it comes to negative sentiment override, our ability to protect ourselves, our ability to recognize danger and recognize it consistently, it's going to happen because there are dangerous people out there, there are dangerous circumstances, and there is inconsistencies, and we have a reflex to guard ourselves against that. Um, for me, it's not so much not doing negative sentiment override, it may be making it a choice. So if I'm continually in a relationship where I feel criticized, like I go back to that example with my spouse, if I'm continually feeling criticized, I always had a defensive, angry reaction until I said, hey, this is what this is about for me. Can we do something about it? I was always going to have that reflex. Now, after we talked about it, I still had that reflex, but I had recognized we opened up a new storyline on this. We opened up a new opportunity. So I can do something different. I can add to this differently. If we're trying to, if we want to, this really isn't a shortcut. Like not having negative sentiment override doesn't make your relationship better. It means we've got to work on some long-standing things that aren't working. So to answer the question, like, no, I don't think there's a way to not have it, especially if the situation calls for it. we may turn it into a choice, and we may recognize this person is never someone that I confide in. This is a person isn't somebody who understands boundaries. So maybe my vigilance for the negativity or my vigilance for the criticism, it's not misplaced, because I know I'm getting that again and again. And so what changes is our boundaries going forward with that relationship, and maybe the proximity that we interact with that relationship and the vulnerability we interact in that relationship. And that's always, I think, a sad thing to do, especially when it's a relationship that we've had for a long time or is one we really care about. But sometimes if we're not able to do that, or we don't catch that message, that's why the negative sentiment override comes up. It's protecting us. It's that automatic protection reflex that we have. So again, I think that's that question of why am I so vigilant for the negativity here? We've got to really be able to answer that. And if it's my partner's negative and criticizing as a rule, there's a good reason why you're protected.
Yeah, especially if he's not willing to change. I mean, but like, if there's room for improvement, if there's an opportunity to go, this is what's happening when you shut down like this, then, but if that's just disregarded, then, then I would want to stay more protected as well.
Mm-hmm.
I was thinking when you were talking about the hypervigilance, that it's kind of like the walking on eggshells, because you're constantly waiting for the other shoe to drop. You're trying to walk that line really carefully so that you're balanced, and it's not, so you're protected and you're not causing problems and whatever. But it's exhausting too.
Yeah. Yep. There's a whole lot of energy that goes into protecting. And I think one of the key questions to answer in any relationship is, how much do I need to protect myself? Because that's always energy intensive. And it will either take from another aspect of a relationship or take from another aspect of your life. So again, being really clear on how much you need to protect, and that it's your choice to protect, that gets you spending your energy where you want to spend it, versus I'm having this reflex that is super energy intensive and derails things for me.
Other questions or comments? While we're waiting, I'm going to share that the Old Lady Posse group started last week, Tuesday, and that was great. So if you identify as a betrayed partner that is of a certain age and it's a little different than the regular drop-in groups, because this is one where you can invite support and accountability. So it really is designed to create that environment and be a safe space. So if you're interested, you can join on sexandrelationshiphealing.com. It's at 8:30 tomorrow morning Pacific time, so 11:30 a.m. Eastern time. But that was great. So Dr. Rob has his live webinar tonight at 5 p.m. Pacific time, and we just keep creating more opportunities. So hopefully people will connect in many different ways. So so let's see. It says this is in so this is, you're sharing this. Is this something you want us to read out loud? I guess you should let me know, because it's in the chat. So I'm not going to read it till you say yes or no in the chat. And so we've got the podcasts on sexandrelationshiphealing.com. There's both Dr. David Fawcett and Dr. Rob do they do a podcast. I'm trying to monitor the chat. You can see I'm not multitasking very well. So the podcasts are both on there. So you can find all kinds of amazing resources on sexandrelationshiphealing.com. Treatment for Men at Seeking Integrity, Los Angeles. Great program. Any questions about that, you can reach out to me. So hopefully you've been able to read the chat. I did. Okay, good. So any comments on it in general, without reading it?
No, it's like, these are boundaries. These look like good boundaries to me, because they're things that, to me, the essence of a good boundary is whether or not you agree to it, I can make sure it happens. So each of these to me has a really clear, a clear course of, here's the action I need to take in response to this if you're not a willing participant in helping me maintain my boundaries. So again, I don't know if you're looking for feedback on this, but I think these are some solid boundaries. They seem very clear to me.
Yeah, I'm going to just read. I am not responsible for your feelings. I think that's
Yep.
really good, and you know, you get to be responsible for, you know, your feelings and your actions. So I think that's good.
Yeah.
Other questions for John? We've got an expert here. Take advantage of it. Well, I don't know if anybody's typing, so we'll wait another little 30 seconds. So in case somebody's typing, but otherwise, you'll be back next week,
Definitely.
another edition, and share more great. I mean, like I've told you this before, and I've shared on other webinars and things too, that, you know, I really appreciate. Oh, good. We have a question coming. So, but I really appreciate, because, you know, you're giving practical tips that, you know, benefit relationships in whatever form they take, not just with a significant other, not just, you know, dealing with betrayal, although definitely applicable for that as well. But
Mm-hmm.
you know, it's really one of those things where I can apply this to, you know, any relationship, and it gives me a lens to look at, you know, for myself too. It's like, okay, you
Yeah.
know, because I was thinking about, well, you know, my significant other relationship is good. I can always work on improving it, but I, you know, I've got some people that, you know, I don't get in proximity to because they aren't safe, and I
Mm-hmm.
don't, you know, like, it is walking on eggshells, you know, all the time. It's exhausting. And I just, you know, so I, you know, some of them I have to interact with on limited basis, but, you know,
Yeah.
otherwise I don't, you know.
Yeah. We have about 10 more of these on just problematic conflict in relationships. So we're going to be looking at next time repair attempts. So I talked a little bit about reaching out and things. So we're going to talk about what effective repair attempts look like and how to recognize those in a relationship next week.
That'll be a great one too. So here, this is a big question. How do my husband and I keep the lines of communication healthy while he's recovering from sexual addiction?
Ooh, I just had a new paradigm on this week. I'm listening to one of my favorite authors, Malcolm Gladwell. I'm listening to his new book, Talking to Strangers. And in this book, he talks about the mistakes we make in interacting with strangers and why it goes bad. And one of the things that he addresses in there is this myth of transparency. That's that this myth we believe that the expression of emotion is universal. So if I'm looking at your face and I see a certain expression, it must mean you're feeling this. He says that's actually not true. It's very culturally bound, and
Oh,
it's important to keep in mind that even if you end up marrying someone who grew up next door to you, they grew up in a different culture than you. So
wow.
I would say the first thing to do, or the first thing to keep in mind to keep the lines of communication healthy, is to stay far, far away from making assumptions about what your partner's thinking, what they're feeling, what's going on. The more explicitly we can put what we want to know, what we're worried about, what we need on the table, the less room there is for that going on an assumption, going so long on an assumption that we totally get it wrong. Um, I think early in recovery for both parties, there's a lot of emotions that are very, very high. And I, you know, at any given time in my career, I could say I'm working with someone right now who is very close to post discovery, and they're waiting for their spouse to leave at any time. And Tammy, you say this all the time. Well, she's still here, so that's a good sign. If any standard couple would take just what their body language says about how they feel about the relationship from the first 3 months of recovery, they'd say we hate this and we want out, because there's a lot of shame, there's a lot of hurt, there's a lot of separateness. So um, if you have a question about what's going on, what he's feeling, what he's thinking, ask. If and I hope that would go vice versa too. If you aren't in a position to hear that or in a position to give that information, just say, I can't talk about that right now. So I think that transparency and asking a lot of questions about what are you feeling, what are you thinking, that's how you keep the lines of communication healthy. Is don't make those assumptions. Don't assume that your partner's as transparent as you think they are or you want them to be. Because it's another one of those things across the board. We're seeing that actually that transparency isn't really a thing. We can't intuit where somebody's at just based on seeing them. At least we don't do it very well. In fact, another interesting point from this book, they talked about this lying study, and they put people in a situation where they were either going to lie or tell the truth, and the person conducting this psychological experiment could verify whether that person lied or not. And then they showed the video to like regular people, like a control group, and then they showed it to judges, law enforcement officers, therapists. And actually the judges, law enforcement officers, and therapists, they did worse at spotting the liar than the control group did.
Wow.
Yeah, just be really, really careful about assumptions. Try not to make them. Check it out if you have a question. That'll keep it healthy.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be, even if you do a soft, what are you thinking? What are you feeling? It's going to be challenging because somebody in early recovery, that's not natural. I mean, if you're acting out, you're stuffing feelings, you're looking to avoid all of that. So so even getting it, what you hope is an honest answer, it's just hard. I'm not making excuses for him. I'm just saying you're going to have to be aware of all of that, and you've got your feelings as well. So, but I think the more that you're just interacting, I think it's good. And like I said, or like Jon said for me, you're still together and you're working on it. And, I know lots and lots of couples that find a healing path through this. So grateful you're here. I hope you keep coming back to the resources on here, for additional support. There's a drop-in group for partners. There was one last night, and there's another one for the non-old lady posse. There's another one on Wednesday at 12:30 p.m. Pacific time, and that's great. To ask other partners, what did you do? What did you say? They'll give you some feedback as well. So the next question is, I know a 12-year-old child that, so this is not a relative, it's just somebody this person's in the sphere of a 12-year-old child who has so much anxiety because of his home life. He eats erasers because he doesn't want to put food where his pain is. Is there anything I can do just to let him know he's enough? I do tell him I think he's enough, but that he's missed, and I think he's great. So she thinks he's closing down and maybe even dissociating. So.
There's a couple things in there. So first, I would wonder if you shared any of these concerns with a parent or a caregiver or someone who is around this child a lot of time, like a teacher or something like that. In my book, I think that's one of the responsibilities I have as an adult and all of the smaller lives around me. If there's something that seems off or they're in serious trouble, have I talked to the people who can help them about my concerns? I think also, like they said here, it's not somebody where you have a lot of direct influence, and that can be difficult. One of the experiences I want anybody to have with me when they're around me is I want them to feel like there's safety around me. So I think smiles, this might sound really dumb, smiles go a really long way. Eye contact goes a really long way. Taking interest, through my years, I've done a lot of work with teenagers and kids, and just asking questions about what's going on in your life right now. What are you excited about? What's important to you? Have you seen the latest Avengers movie or whatever that is? Like, taking a genuine interest is one of those ways that you can show, like, there are people that care about you. The world can be a friendly place for you, but it's really, really hard with kids from a lot of standpoints. I think especially from like a legal standpoint, it's hard to really intervene meaningfully in a kid's life because parents have so many rights and so many responsibilities, and they should in many cases. But it's real hard to intervene there effectively when you don't have the buy-in of the people who take care of the kids. So that's where I would start. Make sure you're talking to people who do have a direct influence and sharing your concerns.
Yeah, I mean, I'm also wondering from a health standpoint, I don't know what happens with erasers in a human body, but I can't imagine anything good happens with that.
Yeah.
So, so that, huge concern, and it's hard to be on the fringe and see this stuff happening and have, like you said, very little control over it.
Yeah.
Who's the book by? Somebody is asking that.
It's by Malcolm Gladwell.
And what was the name of that one?
Talking to Strangers.
I'm putting that in the chat. Somebody asked. So, any other questions, comments? I'm still thinking about the kiddo. I was like,
Yeah.
is there his stomach has to be pumped 2 weeks ago, found another race. Oh no. I can't imagine. I mean, I know, but like, I can't imagine at the emergency room or the doctor's office, they're not going, why are you eating erasers? And somebody not
Yeah.
going, we need to get a mental health screen on this.
Yeah.
It feels like there's so many gaps in systems, I mean, like, every now and then I watch the reality show, stories of the ER, and there's been stuff, sexual things, where they, had to remove items from certain cavities, shall we say, and it's like, this is the 20th time this guy's been there. And I'm like, well, nobody's going like, hey, maybe there's a bigger problem, just kind of crazy. So.
That is a very, very sad situation. And I'm sorry you're not in a position of influence to have more of a direct effect. I think that's a really hard thing to witness and to recognize there's only so much you can do. That's heartbreaking.
Yeah. And unfortunately, people do fall through the cracks with that.
Yeah.
Any other questions, comments? Okay, well, I guess, oh, wait, there's another one. So, thank you so much for the webinar. I can't always get on every time, but I'm sorry. I can't always get on, but every time I have, it's been incredibly helpful info and easy to understand, even with a brain injury. That's great. And honestly, these are recorded. So if you happen to miss one, or if you want to just replay it because you go, gosh, what did he say? And, or how did he say that? Please view them. They're on YouTube, share them, go like them. Maybe we'll get a little following on them.
Yeah.
You'll be in a YouTube star. So just kidding. Okay. All right. Thanks, everybody. See you next week.
You.
Bye-bye.
Bye.